Hi, my name is Steve Hagler. I'm the Executive Director of LearnUp Centers, a nonprofit literacy center on a mission to change how we teach kids to read. And I'm excited to have you with us today for an engaging conversation on the role of after-school and extended programming and learning in helping our communities reduce and eliminate the reading gap. I feel really fortunate today to be with some true experts in the field. I want to welcome Dr. Carol Hill, Executive Director of the Beacon Initiative. The Beacon Centers support 27 schools in underserved K-12, K-8 and middle schools. I'm also understand that she's a master crab cake maker, and I'm looking one day forward to having a delicious meal with you, Carol. I also want to welcome Brian Sauer, Director of Education for the Boys and Girls Club of San Francisco. He has been an educator. He is also in charge of the 13 sites in 5 schools and 8 standalone clubhouses. And with us also is Devin Hunter. He is the Associate Director of the Boys and Girls Club San Francisco Visitation Valley Clubhouse and a proud graduate of George Mason University. Welcome all.
Thanks, Steve.
So what we're here to talk about today is one of the problems that has really become clear over the last year. It's been eye-opening for us, those of us in education, those of us working at home with our children, especially those of us who are not directly in the classroom. We saw more clearly how much effort and time and energy it takes to educate our children, especially those with learning differences. It's clear the school districts have a lot on their plates, and they need partners and collaborators to support all their children's needs. If they could do it alone, they probably would, but that's not the reality. It's going to take a true village to help all of our children gain the reading skills and academic skills and social emotional supports they need to become all that they can be as adults. But one area that we've seen we have a lot of concern, is particularly of a concern to LearnUp centers, is in reading. Prior to the pandemic, we already had an achievement gap in reading that was really significant. The pandemic hasn't helped. And so as we come out of this today, I think it's a really good time to talk about what the role of after school and extended programs are in helping to reduce the reading gap and teaching our kids to read. So to help us get there, I'd like to ask Brian and Carol to kind of set the stage for us and tell us a little bit about after school programs and how they function and the world that you work in. And maybe I could toss it to you, Carol, to give us a start.
Yep. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Carol Hill. As Steve said, I work with the San Francisco Beacon Initiative. We have 27 Beacon centers in 27 schools in SFUSD. And I think the way that beacons work, and beacons are it's an initiative that started in New York. There are 5 beacon cities, so it's sort of a national strategy. But the way that the beacons work in San Francisco is that we use the community schools model as a vehicle for helping us to help kids and families get the tools that they need to be successful in schools, in education. So one of the things that's really, really important to most beacons is to be on the same page with the school. So that means we have 4 components. We have expanded learning, we have family partnerships, we have academic transitions, and behavioral health and wellness. And what we're talking about today is the expanded learning piece. And for us, that is before school, lunchtime, and after school. And the most important thing that we can do is be on the same page, have a common goal with the school. So if the school's goal is to raise literacy, the literacy scores or whatever it is, then that's how beacons normally tailor whatever they're doing. And that could be in expanded learning, or it could be, enhanced or enriched learning, especially in after school. So maybe not necessarily, with tutoring, which would be sort of expanded learning. But enriched learning might be through, clubs or finding ways to do project learning, making, literacy fun. But basically the idea is to be aligned and coordinated with the school so that anything that's happening in the school day, there's a seamless thread that goes through to the after school hours.
Thanks, Carl. Yeah, and so Brian, I think that the role of the Boys and Girls Club is a slightly different. You want to talk us through a little bit about your role and how that functions?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for having me. So as Steve mentioned, San Francisco Boys and Girls Clubs has 13 sites in the city. 5 of those are located on school campuses, and 8 of them are standalone clubs. So 2 of our school-based sites happen to also be Beacon Centers. So Carol and I have worked together throughout the last few years on the development of those Beacon programs. I mean, we're an after-school program, and Boys and Girls Club, often was categorized as the gym and swim. Kids went to school, they left school, they came to us, and we were all fun. And there certainly is that part of our program, but we also do have a strong academic focus as well. So, I like the idea with the Beacons where they talk about being a streamlined, part of a kid's day. And I think for us, we feel like we are just a continuation for the youth after school. So of course, our clubs our school-based clubs, kids don't leave the building. They're still there. We have a strong connection with that school. But for our standalone centers, those centers take in kids from multiple schools. And so, it's a little more challenging to stay aligned with the schools, but that's something that we strive to do. And, in our academic programmings, we do the homework help, we do tutoring, and then we definitely do some literacy work as well. So early literacy with the younger kids, and then our summer programs have literacy programs for K-8. And our entire system serves kids ages 6 to 18. So a wide variety of things going on in terms of academics and what kids need at different ages. So we're striving to be stronger and better, serving our youth and their academic needs and skill developments, kind of dealing with the interrupted learning over the past year and a half, so that we can help kids transition back into the classroom, and make up some ground in terms of what they didn't get being on Zoom for so long in school. So excited to work with Steve and get more into how we've worked with LearnUp and how we've implemented other engaging and creative literacy programming.
Thanks,
Hey,
Brian.
I jump in 1 second?
Sure, Carl. Thanks.
I think Brian brought up a really great point around the pandemic and how, as you said, Steve, schools have, it's been difficult to try to do it all by yourself anyway. But in a global pandemic, it was even more imperative that the schools and partners, whether it be Beacons or other partners, work together to make sure that the kids and the families were served. And so, there are different programs that happened as a result of that. We had the community hub initiatives in San Francisco, and other partnerships that were really, really instrumental in helping kids to at least, attempt to keep up with distance learning and supporting. So as Brian said, now it's a matter of trying to transition back and to, stem that, what they called the COVID slide, that was particularly harmful for Black and Brown kids. They were disproportionately negatively impacted. So I just wanted to be like, yes, that is true. I agree.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I want to have Devin jump in here a little bit. So Devin, kind of some of our conversations, we talked both about things that aren't working so well, but also you've had some pretty good successes. Why don't you talk through a little bit and set the stage for us for the kinds of things that are working and what's happening for you that you feel function for kids, and then maybe we can dive into some of the other challenges that we're seeing.
Excuse me. Absolutely. And thanks for having me, y'all. And I want to also reiterate something that Dr. Hill and Brian talked about. When we think about this last year, a lot of the CBOs and a lot of the after school programs were the adults who were facilitating information, who were getting lessons from teachers to students who are creating bridges where there may not have been before. And I think that's something that has caused us to all relook at our role, right, in this fight for education equity. I think some things that have been really working when we think about like our homework help, when we think about our book clubs, the games, the things that don't maybe feel like learning but actually are. I think that is something that all folks who want to work with young people can do extremely well. I think also, as Brian alluded to, we had a literacy program over the summer where each lesson was themed. There was trainings that we gave our staff. And so, while not becoming a literacy specialist, we did ensure that there was dedicated time every day to talk about reading, to talk about books, whether it was book clubs, whether it was small groups or games. And again, while not attacking the huge problem that literacy or that literacy can have in schools, it definitely makes a dent in it when you have kids who may or may not be reading in school, definitely have a space to read at their after school programs. And so I want to make sure that we're highlighting that and continuing to do that and asking ourselves, well, what else? What more?
Brian or Carol, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, the summer literacy program in particular this year was, all of our sites, had the same curriculum, with the flexibility to make it work for their particular group of kids. And it is reading, and that's a big part of it. But we also look at, speaking, listening, writing, and vocabulary development, and again, making it fun and engaging so that kids, it's sort of disguised learning, is the way it works for us. We're not classrooms, we're not classroom teachers, and we want to make sure that, kids are developing these skills, whether they really recognize it or not.
Totally agree with that. I mean, there are many ways, especially our programs are primarily in, so we're in all the middle schools in San Francisco and in all the most underserved K-8 and elementary schools in SFUSD. So there are many ways to try to attack this issues, but one of the ways really important for us is to really connect with the teacher, to bring in whatever is going on in the school day through to what is happening after school or at lunchtime programming. And to also bring in great partners and, including Steve and LearnUp to fill in some of the other gaps that, maybe. So we have book clubs, we have even book making. We have different partners that come in and, depending on the CBO, and are doing amazing work. But one of the things that's been really great is to see the many different strategies that the different partners employ and the different ways that you have to go about reaching the students. Again, super imperative right now as they go back in person, try to figure out what the impact of the last year and a half is. And so us being flexible and trying to reach them however we can is, what's happening.
So I'm hearing a common theme of the CBOs and the after school and extended learning programs cooperating with the schools and the teachers and creating this kind of a seamless extension of the day. So like the day is no longer the 6 hours that a child's on campus, but it's extending into the after school and maybe even before school programs, right? And that seems to make a lot of sense. And yet, as we talk to educators, a lot of concern around some of the pain points that they're seeing inside these programs as well. So I was wondering, Devin, if you could talk to us a little bit about, in addition to the good work you're doing, what are some of the challenges you're seeing on the literacy side and the reading side?
Yeah, of course. And I think this is, for me, particularly salient because the staff that we have, right, they love young folks, they love doing this work, but they're not trained teachers, right? And maybe they've gone to school for education or social work, but for whatever reason, they've arrived at an after-school program and they want to do the best they can for kids. What we're finding, and I'll give an example just with homework help, right? If young folks can't read, then, you're having one of my staff maybe doing a one-on-one session when they might have 15 or 20 other kids to help. If a young person can't read well, then it's really difficult to do math problems, right? if a young person, and I think there's plenty of research out there that talks about how a young person's literacy or their reading levels is predictive for some of their other outcomes. And I think that's the biggest thing, particularly last year when, you know, a lot of our kids or all of our kids were interfacing with education via a screen, right? The only other human contact that they had throughout the year outside of their parents was often their CBO or their after school provider. And I think what we saw that maybe was different from last year is we saw some of the struggle that teachers probably go through on a regular basis, right? Whereas if we have 30, 70, 100 kids, teachers may have that or more, right? And they have to contend with all these different types of, I won't call them setbacks, but definitely there are a lot of barriers that teachers have to face, including resourcing, right? And really just taking the care and attention for each individual child. And it's difficult. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've noticed this past year and a half is, or maybe the biggest question I have is, what can we do to alleviate that, right? What can we do to increase support, to increase resources, to work together kind of in tandem with schools and teachers and administrators to create like a new generation of readers?
And that kind of brings to kind of the question, Brian, like, you know, what have you done at the Boys and Girls Club to kind of bridge that gap that you're seeing between the children you're teaching and working with in the after school programs and the skills they need and the extra help they need?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely is the biggest challenge. I mean, when I was a teacher, it was always the biggest challenge having, you know, different abilities, different levels, you know, within one classroom, and how do you meet the needs of all the kids? So that certainly is something we see in the clubs. So again, you know, I'd go back to, you know, kind of the idea of the disguised learning. So, you know, we have the homework help where we align with schools and do our best to communicate with teachers and you know, principals, admin, counselors to find out, you know, where the kids are and what they need to be doing. And then, you know, we do our best to support that through, you know, the homework help time, which our staff certainly are a big part of. And that also can include volunteers, tutors that come in. We have paid professional tutoring as well. And so those are some of the things really to focus in on what they're doing in school. And then outside of that, you know, in order to, you know, to continue to bring joy and promote the love of learning, we do have the early literacy programs, which we have so many different creative, you know, talented staff people that have created and helped create programs, you know, some that involve spoken word, poetry, music, art, you know, playwriting, acting, as well as podcasting, things along those lines, things that bring those skills, you know, to the surface. But they're not necessarily the thing that the kids think are the end goal of the program. You know, they might be, I want to, you know, create a 2-minute podcast about my summer experience or my favorite food, or a place I've traveled, you know, those things. And they get to see that result. They get to see that product made, and, you know, it's something that they can be proud of. And in that process, you know, we've taught both the hard literacy skills, we've, you know, helped develop some vocabulary, as well as some of the soft skills of, you know, organization, and other things that they're gonna need to be successful. The other stream is STEM programs. So yeah, just different things. We do some in-house creative STEM programming. So we have partners, and a lot of that is really, you know, it's not content driven, but it's really problem solving, hands-on, cooperation, you know, sort of setting a goal and trying to figure out if they can meet it. So, yeah, so that's really what we do to really promote and tie our programming into education and academic skill development.
And Carol, what are some of the things that the Beacon initiatives are doing to help with the support systems that the district is maybe not able to provide during their school day?
I mean, pretty much the things that Brian said. I think some of the indirect strategies that are in place are, just the general what folks do in after school, which is increase students' sense of belonging. A lot of times if students don't feel like they are being successful in the classroom, especially around literacy, there are places in after school where they do feel successful, and those are the things that we sort of prioritize. I think also just, again, as a result of the pandemic, people have sort of maybe a deeper understanding of how important it is to kind of customize for students, right? So the pods were smaller, but there were all these pieces that were kind of a part of being in a pod, and you had to connect with the teachers individually, and then you had to get the assignments and all that stuff. And so I think that people saw some real progress from students as a result of being able to customize. And I think that that's something that they're going to have to, continue to do. But as I started off, there are many ways that these that literacy can be impacted positively, just from the general youth development standpoint, and that's more along the lines of creating a culture and environment where students feel successful, and where they feel like they belong, where they feel like they have connections, where they feel like they are appreciated and loved. And so I know that trailed off into a little bit of the maybe esoteric, but it is true. That's the thing, is that we are not equipped to be, or actually I can't say all after school programs aren't equipped, but most after school programs aren't equipped to actually be teachers. So we have to employ those other areas. We have to activate those other areas so that students are able to kind of access the parts of themselves that they maybe are having a harder time accessing in the classroom.
Well, the feeling of love and acceptance and self-esteem inside a child as they walk through life is one of the keys to success. So even if they're not having success academically, if they're still in an environment of support, that can mean a lot. But at the end of the day, we also want to provide them the core key fundamental skill sets that they need to do things on their own. And I kind of wanted to get back to Brian for a second to talk a little bit about, like, how are you working inside the Boys and Girls Club with like a program like LearnUp, and how do you get there to the point where you can bring in these skill sets that kids need so that they can not only feel the love but also read, be able to attack the materials that they need to attack, be able to get through the day on their own independently as readers. Which is such a key component to academic success, but it's also a component to career success and other parts of one's life.
Yeah, and as Carol was saying, the idea of the self-esteem that came up, and I mean, one thing that I think is really important as educators is, it has to be a real sense of self-esteem. I think kids know when they're being, when they're being elevated, maybe in a way that doesn't make sense to them. So if you're telling them they're a great reader, but they can't read, they know that, and they know that your praise is not, is not genuine, and it isn't going to land with them. And so, I think it is really important with this idea of individualizing and really looking at what the needs are of the youth. So, to your question is, I mean, I've been with the Boys and Girls Club for 6 years. And like I said, before that, I was a teacher. So, it's generally, you pick up pretty quick, kids that are struggling, you pick up pretty quick. Kids that, do struggle with reading, with words, with writing. It's a very difficult thing to hide in any academic setting. So, as we, at the Boys and Girls Club, we aren't an intensive academic program. We saw these things, staff really continuously and have always sort of, one constant is expressed the want and the desire to help these kids or to find a way to help these kids, even though, we're not necessarily the program that's designed or set up to do that. So, we've in my time here, we've elevated the number of tutoring hours we provide. We've looked for higher quality tutors. We've looked for tutors with the cultural competency to meet our kids where they're at and really help them. And those result in some gains for kids. And in some we've had really good success stories. And then, with the kids, we see that just can't, they're trying to learn to read, they're following their teachers at school, but whatever method is being used, they're hitting that wall, they're hitting that barrier, and they aren't able to overcome it. So kids that do know how to read, even if they're struggling, but they can do it, they have the skills. We can have a lot of success with those kids because we can, make it creative, we can make it fun, and we can push it along. But when we would see that group of kids that just couldn't get past that barriers, when we had the strong desire to bring in a program, to refer them to a program, to find something for them, to learn those skills in a different method, in a different way, because the way that it was being taught to them was not working. And we know that it takes an intense one-on-one, interaction really to make that happen. We know schools, they want to do it as well. I know teachers are frustrated when they can't get through because maybe they have their approach and their approach isn't working. And they've got a lot of other things going on to try to, learn and implement a new approach, at the same time. So, schools can work at the speed that they can work at. So we know that if things go on too long, the kids it's only gonna get more difficult. So we wanted to find a way to step in and bring those programs, bring those services to the youth that we have, and try to be that safety net. So that potentially, they are more successful, so not potentially, but so they will be more successful at school, and be able to progress with their peers, with their classmates, at the rate that they need to stay with their class and to stay, on point with their academics.
Yeah, and Steve, can I add to that? Really just thinking about there's something special about after school programs in that we see almost generations of kids come through, right? Whereas an elementary school teacher, right, from 3rd to 5th grade may see the same kids, but once they send them to middle school, right, now they're a new school, maybe a new educator's problem, and sometimes to start from scratch, right? Sometimes there's a whole reassessment of these individual skill sets. Whereas after school programs, oftentimes you have the same kids who are coming through elementary school, middle school, and potentially high school. And so I think there's a really powerful thing about the way that we can interact with kids on a multi-year journey to figure out what constitutes academic success for them and what kinds of repeated interventions can be done like very consistently. I think that's particularly even before Boys and Girls Club, when I worked at an education nonprofit, thinking about how can we create a continuum of care, right, that lasts even beyond what most schools are designed to provide.
That seems like a really interesting point. Do you want to follow up on that, Carol?
Well, I was going to say, and even at the micro level, like, that loop that you're talking about is so crucial, even at like per student. So that you have an issue or a directive from a teacher, this student needs this. There's an intervention that gets put into place, and then there has to be like a feedback loop back to the teacher so that there's like the kid feels held in the intervention. So at the macro level, then what you said, Devin, to be able to go from generation to generation with it in after school. that's why it's so important to be able to have partners who can work with the school and with the student, and then also be able to, again, funnel information back, have that exchange with the school, so that the student we can all be tracking and figuring out whether or not the kid is actually being successful.
So, Devin, you've been working with a pilot program with LearnUp. You want to talk a little bit about the kinds of success you've seen, implementing a program that's going to look at, more of a skills-based, specialized approach, as opposed to this kind of more general approach to teaching kids to read?
Absolutely. So last year was our first opportunity to pilot with LearnUp, and I think a few things we found out very quickly, right? So as a member or as a participant in the Community Hubs initiative, we had an opportunity to, and I call it opportunity / challenge, right? To be the main adults that were supporting kids in their education. I think specifically when I'll name a few cases, right? When you have students who have IEPs, right? Specifically in reading or attention, when you have students who are English language learners, right? We have students who are in special day classes during the year, and now they're doing their distance learning online. And so you have a lot of these students with these very particular learning challenges that, the professionals have deemed these are the things that these kids need to work on. These are the interventions. Now the question is, how do we actually make them happen, right? Or how do we, and that's not counting whatever digital equity divide there already is, especially in the neighborhoods in District 10, which is where I serve. I think one of the biggest things, or one of the most impactful things that LearnUp was able to do, is we can take some of our kids with our IEPs and say, all right, I can look at their IEP at a glance. I can let you know, or let the tutor know exactly what folks have already decided this young person needs to work on. And then I can create space and time every day, 3 or 4 days a week, to ensure that this young person is getting specialized tutoring help, right? With our kids who are English language learners. Boom, we all know that the skills that are good for English language learners are good for all kids who are reading. And so now we have kids who may have been in country 2 or 3 years. If it's their 3rd year in country and it's been a pandemic year, they're still having a lot of time adjusting with the language. And so now we have, again, dedicated space and time, 3 to 4 days a week, to say, you know what, I'm going to talk to their counselor, I'm going to talk to their social worker, I'm going to talk to their teacher, and now I'm going to talk to the tutor, and I'm going to try to synthesize this information so that we can build a plan, right? Same thing with special day classes. I think that's the cycle that we've kind of understood this last year and a half, is there are opportunities to serve kids in really specialized way. There often just needs to be a bridge to bring that ecosystem together. And I think that's something that LearnUp and Boys and Girls Club, specifically at Biz Valley, has been able to do this year.
So, we were talking about an example, a student that you were talking about. I think there's a kid named Jason who you saw change over this kind of specialized learning. And you want to talk about Jason a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. Phenomenal young person. I think Brian brought up a point earlier around sometimes the disingenuous way that adults can maybe talk to kids about their reading levels, right? Jason is a student who 5th grade, going to 6th grade, on an IEP, and honestly is very aware that he's struggling with reading, right? And honestly aware to the point where he would be frustrated when he had an assignment. He would be frustrated when we even played our games and did some of our lower level reading support. And then that frustration can sometimes turn into behavior, right? That frustration can turn into kind of just disdain for education and learning. And I think that's the thing that was really striking to me, where if we're going to talk about social emotional learning and social emotional skills, we also have to be actually building confidence. And so with a program like LearnUp, there's an opportunity to say, okay, I think we started at maybe a 1st grade level when we started our sessions, and through almost 3 months, we got them to 3.8, right? So going on to 4th grade level. And I think part of what we saw, and this is something I never heard before, we finished the session and Jason was like, I actually like reading. I can't wait till my next session. And I never thought that I would, hear that from him thinking about all the opportunities that we've given to read. And he's one of the first kids to say like, no, or he's one of the first kids to make up a reason why reading is not happening today. And so again, like there are skills that are being learned, and there's also confidence that's being built. And the way that the program works, like you're getting these assessments every now and then. And so you can see, and the young people can see how well they're doing. And I think that also increases the want to continue. And I think again, figuring out how we bridge some of the services needed with the kids who need them, knowing that the resources are sometimes thin on the school side, is the whole mission.
Hey, Carol, I wanted to ask you a similar question. Like, tell us some of the success you've seen in providing these programs into a more specialized program into the extended programs.
You know, I'm going to say that I wish you had my staff member right here, because I don't have an example like a specific student like Devin right now, and I feel sad about that, because I was a Beacon director for many years, and I would have been able to spit out a zillion students and a zillion examples. But right now I'm the executive director. I have to depend on my staff for all that. So
take us to the next place then. Like, so how do we go about doing this? If we all agree that, you know, that the extended programs and after school programs are a great place for putting specialized remediation and specialized skill building as a extended or as a cooperation, as a longer part of the day, or as a built-in part of a child's school experience, how do we go about doing that more than what we've been doing in the past? Like, what's the next steps?
Oh, well, now we're back. Okay, then.
Now I'm back up at the 40,000.
I'm with you on that one. Okay, well, so this is a fantastic moment in time, because I think that many of our school systems are looking at what worked, what didn't work, what hasn't worked over, you know, the past 100 years, and then especially in particular the past year and a half, and all the lessons that we learned. So I think we're at a point where we're sort of at a recalibration point, and you know, a place where we can a place of creativity and innovation. So I'm excited to, you know, think about the ways and that, you know, partners like LearnUp can actually be a part of the system of, you know, after school interventions that we use, because there's so many students, and everybody needs something, and not the same thing is going to work for every student. So for me, I think that, you know, it is a matter of, if it's an after school program, of course, there's always the money aspect that, you know, that rears its ugly head. But to the extent that, you know, all those things could be worked out, I think that there's a way that we can make a real difference if we're able to engage, you know, interventions such as the LearnUp one, to especially work with our students who have special needs. I think that that's a matter of showing the results and showing the success, and having, you know, you have already Boys and Girls Club that you know been working with, and so I think that it's a matter of just, you know, making sure that those connections stay strong, and that people like get the information, right? Because it's like doing things like this where you can get reach, you know, out to different organizations and audiences. But I think I don't think it's a huge lift. I know it feels like it sometimes, but I feel like, you know, again, we have programs in 27 schools. If the money thing works out, and, you know, it works out for students who want, for organizations that want to use it, then, you know, one of the partners that we want to use is you guys. So,
well, we're here for you.
I know, right?
we're there. So one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking was that, you know, when we look at reading spectrums inside schools, we have what we consider to be the natural readers or typical readers, and they tend to be the kid that picks up reading and is moving along pretty quickly. You don't need to do much with them. You have another chunk of kids who, if you give them good reading instruction, they'll pick it up pretty readily. And then if you have this other chunk of kids that really need a lot of explicit phonics instruction in order to learn how to read. The kids that are at this far end of the spectrum are the ones we tend to see IEPs with, and they're getting remediation inside their school systems. But there's this whole other chunk of kids who could use the structured literacy, who could use really intensive structured phonics, who are not receiving necessarily the one-on-one intensive that they should be getting inside the school, because there's just not enough resources, enough time in the day to make that happen. Extending that into the after-school program seems like a natural fit, where you would just say, okay, well, let's bring those programs and expand the opportunity to more kids who could use it. Is that a viable option?
I mean, I think from the direct service side, right, it makes perfect sense. I think the biggest thing is collaboration, right? And so there is an opportunity for us, and I think I'll reiterate this, during the pandemic, and I think Dr. Hill talked about it as well, schools saw how important after schools programs and CBOs were to the whole kind of development, right, of our children, of our young folks. And if you have a partner with these specialized skills, if you have a bridge being an after school or CBO, and if you have willing teachers and administrators, then we can absolutely make magic happen, right? We can absolutely interrupt the cycle that continuously sends fifth graders to middle school who can't read, or continuously sends eighth graders to high school who can't read, who are in that middle chunk. I think that's that teaching to the middle is something that often folks in schools don't get a chance to do, but we could do it here.
And Brian, I want to talk to you. I mean, we've talked a lot about some of the challenges that you've seen at the Boys and Girls Club, kind of the systemic level, and some of the things you're working on this year to help reduce some of the friction and some of the more difficult challenges we faced during the pandemic and during other parts of bringing these reading programs to your kids.
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge, and I think coming out of the pandemic, and this sort of echoes what both Carol and Devin have said, is being really aligned and being seen as part of a continuation of the school day. And so, we're developing. I mean, we brought on a new role, a person whose job it is to really keep track of all the youth in the club. And communicate with schools and families and kind of close that loop of communication so that we know what they need, the schools know what they need, the parents know what they need, and then we know where they're getting those services and support, during the day. So, if it doesn't fit into their school schedule, we'll fit it in their after school schedule and vice versa. But that we know that we can do it, when we work together, and that when schools do see us as a true partner and a true continuation of the day is when it works best. And we have some really great schools that, really great partner schools out there, and some that we hope to bring along and make those, forge those relationships and deepen them so that we can show them how we can continue to serve their kids and meet those goals, whether it's an IEP goal or just the goal of that middle group of kids that we were talking about that could use the additional support. It's once that's in place, I think the work, I've seen it personally happen so quickly and so effectively. To bring kids up and sort of make them feel like, okay, now I feel like I'm in third grade, right? I feel like I can do what a third grader can do. And that's really important and really valuable.
So I encourage you in the audience to put questions and comments into the comments part of the live stream. Laura online has a question about whether working with kids in person versus the online Zoom tutoring, if you found it to be a difference. Devin, you want to talk a little bit about that? I know I have thoughts on it.
So I'll start with saying there's nothing like an in-person interaction, right? Where you can feel what a young person is feeling, where you can like really hear them, where they can, you can activate kind of a higher level of community by being in person. What I will say is what is necessary, when you think of online versus in-person tutoring is that warm handoff, right? And it's a trust between the adults, and it's a trust that the young person has in both adults, that we are all in this together, right? That all the decisions that will be made with you in mind. And it's honestly a conversation then on the back end between all the adults. So again, if you're at an after school program, right, where there's your after school staff and the tutor, or whether it's the teacher and the after school program, whoever is on the other side of that screen has to be in constant communication with the adult who is right next to the young person. I think that's what makes the difference in how well the young person receives whatever intervention is in place, particularly when Zoom and if Zoom is going to be a part of our future as far as education is concerned.
Hey, I'll jump in real quick and say that, and again, along the lines of that customization, right? So there's some students who did really well during the pandemic because we were online. They did not have to have, the social interactions that stress kids out, or, whatever the case was, is that some kids really did well. And that's why, as I said, that customization piece is going to be really important as we go forward, so that we can capitalize on in any gains that were, as a result of the pandemic. And at the same time, of course, I vote always for in-person because of that, that warm actual handoff. But, we still can't do that because of COVID. There's no handshaking or handoffing. That's a joke, but I don't know. You're probably not supposed to do that on the Facebook Live.
It's on. Brian, do you want to add? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think Devin's right, and Dr. Hill, that there nothing replaces in person, where you can pick up not just on the verbal cues, but nonverbal, and get a real sense if the kid is understanding what they're doing there on the paper. So we're definitely going to move towards returning to in-person tutoring. But I do think we did learn, that in-person tutoring, or maybe virtual tutoring, does have its opportunities. And one of those, I think, is the skill set of the tutor. So, our in-person tutor, if we're in a club with kids ages 6 to 18 and they show up at 3:00 and they're doing some fourth grade math with a kid, and then, 5:00 they're moving to a middle school, science, and then, the next hour, a high school kid shows up and needs AP physics. Like that would be a very talented tutor to have in front of you, to be able to do all three of those, back to back to back. And so, sometimes I think the virtual potentially does open up more like having tutors with more skill sets, and being able to say, we need a geometry tutor and that speaks Arabic, or we need we'd like someone that could do some fifth grade writing, preferably a female. And we're working with a online tutoring company that we're going to pilot to get to see how that works. What ages are the best to do that with, what subjects, how does that continue to be part of our educational offerings, and how can we best effectively utilize that, the opportunities that brings.
Yeah, I think that what we saw from our end is that in-person tutoring works really well, and it's pretty good. But when we started this program with the Boys and Girls Club, we were bringing kids to our site to do the tutoring, and we found that there were all kinds of structural barriers to bringing children to our site, between the buses and the issues that are happening at school and the kids getting there. It was very challenging. So Brian and I decided to do some tutoring at the clubhouse, the Fisher Clubhouse in downtown, or in the City Hall area, Civic Center. And we found that worked really well to bring tutors to the kids, so that the kids were going to the children and doing that program with them. In the middle of that, COVID happened, and we moved everything online the very next day. And we didn't see a drop off in learning. We saw a drop off in technical skills. Kids didn't learn to use Zoom. There is definitely Zoom fatigue, which hopefully will go away as kids are in person more. But what it also meant that when we moved to the Viz Valley Clubhouse is that we were incorporating tutors from all over the nation. We could recruit tutors who are not necessarily from that neighborhood. So we didn't have to move the tutor, and we didn't have to move the student. So while there's something lost in the fidelity of being in person, there's other things gained in not moving a lot of resources around and using the infrastructure and using the assets that already exist inside these organizations. So it's kind of there's some things that work really well, some things that maybe you get a little lost, but there's some big gains to be made if we do this right. And wonder, Carol or Brian or Devin, you have anything to add?
No, I agree with that.
I agree too. I do. I remember writing a grant proposal, and I contacted you and I was like, do you think you guys are going to be able to move your strategies to virtual? And who knew how important that was going to be? So I totally understand again the what you just said. The idea of one place got really blown up in COVID, so that you can be in New York and still tutor the kid in San Francisco, and they don't have to move, and they also don't have to have maybe all the distractions that might be in another kind of setting if they are in a place of their choosing. So yeah, I think that's definitely an opportunity and a benefit, a weird benefit of COVID.
Yeah, it's a strange silver lining. I agree. It's like you kind of look at go like, well, who would have thought that would come out of this? But it could be, I think there could be an interesting piece where, we may have a broader pool of tutors who can come in and work with kids from all different backgrounds and all different parts. I mean, we're talking about an urban community, but the rural communities have similar challenges of moving children and tutors around to get the services they need. Distance learning offers that bridge. Would you do it in person? If you could do it, you could figure it all, line it up, probably. But if that's a challenge, then this is a pretty good second best, right? And then, if you have that right program with the right support, the youth development, the educator or the staff member helping to bridge those gaps and making sure the child's there and got the headphones on and the mic works and the Zoom's working and connecting with the parents and the teachers to close that loop, it all of a sudden becomes a pretty robust program, right? And then I was thinking that, that one of the pieces that could bridge that is if we could hire and train tutors who were local to the clubhouses or local to the programs, then maybe this could be a hybrid where some kids are getting in person, some kids are getting Zoom, some kids are getting the cool disguised learning happening inside the power hour, and everyone's getting kind of their needs met to the best of our abilities at hopefully a price point that would make sense for the budgetary aspects that Carol brought up, which is always a big question, like how you're going to pay for it. To which I always argue the downstream costs are more expensive than the upstream costs. So it's probably better to do it now than it is to pay for it later. But those are my own personal views on the world. As we're moving towards the end of the hour here, I wanted to see if there's any more questions from the audience, or if Carol, Brian, or Devin, if you have things that you want to bring up at this point, and then I'm going to ask you to close. So think about some final thoughts. But there's a question from Nargis about how the Boys and Girls Club recruit volunteers, tutors, and paid professionals support their programs. I'm going to toss it to Brian.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump on that. So, Boys and Girls Club San Francisco is very fortunate. We've been operating in the city for over 125 years, almost 130, I think, at this point. So we're very well established. We have a very well established network of folks that have supported us, for decades or generations, even in families. So, one is we have our board of directors. We have a younger board called the next gen board. And then, anyone can really go on our website and volunteer as an individual. And then of course we have, corporations and other people that also, will come as a group. So there's a lot of that just sort of, I know our volunteer director of volunteers works really hard to do that, but I also think we do have a really well-established program in the city. And so some of those volunteers, as they come in, they can sort of elect what type of role they want to play. So, if they want to, play basketball with kids, that's great. If they want to do art, if they want to come in as a group and clean and paint, that's great too. But a lot of them will identify tutoring. And so that kind of gets me, gets to me or gets to a club that's looking for volunteers. And then the tutoring program. So yeah, when I started, we had one tutoring program, and they unfortunately were going to be shifting and weren't going to be able to work with us any longer. And so at that point, I was working with that company or that organization, and I just did my research. I tried to find every tutoring company that might work and talk to them, and found one out of Oakland that's just been a really great partner for years. They're very consistent. They're really well run. They're trained. Tutors are well trained. They're reliable, skilled. And so that's really, at this point, it's just maintaining a really good, strong, positive relationship. And they had the desire to work with more kids, and to work with kids that needed the support that maybe couldn't afford the market rate price of what tutoring goes for. So it really worked out well. And then we've piloted a couple other companies that do some online tutoring, and we're going to do a little bit more of it this year and figure out, what companies and what structure works best for us.
Great. Thanks, Brian. So one quick last little question. What have you learned about working with kids with more extreme behavior issues and resistance to tutoring? I'm going to toss that to Devin, because I think you probably have some insight into that.
No, for sure. That's a great question. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is like all behavior has a reason, right? Like there are no youth that act out or that perform like kind of challenging behavior without a reason, right? And the second thing I would say is like relationships are the most important thing that we will ever do as youth developers. Outside of any program, outside of any tutoring service, outside of anything is a relationship, the personal relationship, right, that this caring adult has with this young folks. Once you have a strong relationship, I think there's a higher chance that you figure out what that reason is, right? Whether that reason is I had a bad day in school and I don't think my teacher likes me, or whether that reason is I didn't like the lunch, so I didn't eat, right? I think that a lot of the extreme behaviors that we like maybe categorize as extreme often have like more simple reasons. And even if they're not simple, they can at least be, they can be talked about with our young folks, right? And so something that one of my mentors told me a long time ago is he said, if you can heal the root, then you can heal the tree, right? And so really figuring out like what are the root causes of some of the extreme behavior. And once you develop strong relationships, tutoring actually isn't an issue, right? It's not that kids don't want to learn, it's that they may not want to learn in that environment, or they may not want to learn with that person. And so I think our opportunity is to like really work on those two things. And that's been my experience over the last year and a half, and even prior to the Boys and Girls Club, is relationships are the key, like the foundation to all good youth development.
And with that, I want to thank you all for being with us today. I want to thank Dr. Carol Hill, Brian Sauer, and Devin Hunter for sharing your insights in this exciting and challenging world we find ourselves. I'd also like to thank Tony Johnson of Humanity Collective for support in bringing this conversation to life. This year, LearnUp is on a mission to raise $100,000 to provide scholarships to deserving children to support after-school and extended learning programs. You can learn more and donate if you feel so at learnupcenters.org. I'd like to thank you all for being here today, and appreciate you giving us your insights in this really important question we have before us over the next couple of years.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I'd be happy if anyone out there wants to learn more about what we do and how we do it. Feel free to reach out. Our website is kidsclub.org, and you can find my contact information and Devin's contact information on there, and be happy to tell you more about what we do.
And Carol, you want to give a quick plug?
Oh, sure. I'm happy to also talk about Beacons or anything related to community schools. Feel free to get in contact with me at carol@sfbeacon.org.
And you can reach me at Steve Hagler at learnupcenters.org. And we're happy to continue this conversation on Facebook at the LearnUp Centers Facebook group. And we're also involved in a lot of the conversations on reading in those groups as well, in Facebook groups. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great evening, great day.
Bye.